I taught myself, Professor. From books in the library, from auditing classes when I could, from the problems you and the other professors leave on these boards every night. What happens when a brilliant mind is hidden behind a janitor's uniform? When Marcus Johnson was caught solving complex equations in an empty MIT classroom, Professor Harrington couldn't believe his eyes. But would the prestigious academic stand up for this self-taught mathematical genius when the entire system threatened to shut him out? Why did Marcus refuse to sit down during his lectures, and what shocking secret from his past would change everything? This incredible story of hidden talent, systemic prejudice, and ultimate vindication will leave you breathless. Don't miss a single moment of this emotional journey that's changing lives across the world. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Marcus Johnson moved silently through the empty hallways of MIT's mathematics building, pushing his cleaning cart with practiced ease. At 32, he'd been working as a janitor here for almost 7 years, invisible to the brilliant minds that walked these halls during daylight hours. He checked his watch, 10:47 p.m. Right on schedule. The professors had all gone home, and he had these hallowed halls to himself. Marcus smiled. This was his favorite part of the night shift. As he entered classroom 3B, his eyes immediately went to the chalkboard still covered in equations from today's advanced calculus lecture. Professor Harrington's class. Marcus could tell by the distinctive notation style. His fingers itched as he scanned the complex mathematical formulations. These proofs are elegant, he whispered to himself, but the approach is all wrong. Marcus propped his mop against the wall, wincing as a sharp pain shot through his lower back. The old injury flared up whenever he stood too long. Dr. Winter's face flashed in his mind, her scornful expression as she'd grabbed him in high school, forcing him to sit when all he'd wanted was to stand due to his back discomfort. The fall had exacerbated what had been a minor injury, turning it into a chronic condition. Pushing away the painful memory, Marcus approached the board. He hesitated, then picked up a piece of chalk. It had become his nightly ritual, solving problems left on the boards, then erasing his work before anyone could discover it. Tonight, Professor Harrington had been working on a variation of the Hodge conjecture. Marcus recognized it immediately. He'd been studying it for months through textbooks he'd borrowed from the library. As his hand moved across the board, equations flowing from his mind through his fingers, the pain in his back faded. Here, in this empty classroom, he was more than a janitor. Here, he was a mathematician. Hours later, as the first hints of dawn crept through the windows, Marcus stepped back to admire his work. The proof was elegant, concise, and, if he wasn't mistaken, groundbreaking in its approach. But it wasn't for the world to see. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. With a sigh, he picked up his cleaning cloth. By the time Professor Harrington arrived for his 8 a.m. lecture, all evidence of Marcus's mathematical brilliance would be gone, washed away like footprints in the sand, leaving only the spotless shine of a well-cleaned chalkboard. Marcus's secret would remain safe for another day. Or so he thought. Gentlemen, and Eleanor, Professor Richard Harrington nodded toward the lone woman at the conference table, we're rapidly approaching the submission deadline for the Wolf Prize. I need not remind you of its importance to our department's funding. The senior mathematics faculty of MIT sat around the polished oak table, laptops open and expressions serious. Department head Dr. Eleanor Thompson adjusted her glasses and cut straight to the point. Richard, frankly, we're concerned. You promised a breakthrough on the modified Hodge conjecture months ago. The committee expects results, not promises. Harrington straightened his Italian silk tie, a gift from his wife on their last anniversary. At 54, he was the youngest full professor in the department's history, with 3 published books and a wall of accolades. He wasn't accustomed to having his abilities questioned. The solution is forthcoming, he said coolly. Mathematical brilliance can't be scheduled like a department meeting, Eleanor. Dr. James Wilson, one of the few black professors in the department, raised an eyebrow but remained silent. The tension in the room was palpable. "Perhaps if you spent less time at the faculty club and more time at your chalkboard," Dr. Thompson replied, her voice like ice. As the meeting adjourned, Harrington felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. The truth was, he'd been stuck on the same problem for weeks. His reputation, and the department's prestigious grant, hung in the balance. Later that evening, Harrington sat alone in his wood-paneled office, surrounded by mathematical texts and awards. He loosened his tie and poured himself a finger of scotch from the crystal decanter he kept in his bottom drawer. His phone buzzed. A text from his wife: "Dinner with the Prestons at 8. Don't forget." Harrington sighed. Another evening of academic small talk and subtle competition. He replied that he'd be working late, again. Caroline would understand. She always did. He returned to the equations on his tablet, but his mind kept circling back to Thompson's words. The modified Hodge conjecture had become his white whale, consuming his thoughts and evading his grasp. "Perhaps I need a fresh perspective," he muttered to himself, gathering his materials. He'd work in classroom 3B tonight. Sometimes a change of scenery sparked new ideas. As he walked through the quiet hallways, he barely noticed the dark-skinned man pushing a cleaning cart who stepped aside to let him pass. Such service staff were practically invisible to Harrington, merely part of the institution's machinery, like the heating system or water fountains. "Evening, Professor," the janitor said politely. Harrington gave a distracted nod without making eye contact. His mind was already filling with equations, unaware that the solution he sought might be closer than he thought, and from a source he would never have considered. The clock on the classroom wall ticked past midnight as Professor Harrington rubbed his tired eyes. 3 hours of work had yielded nothing but frustration and a wastebasket full of crumpled papers. The modified Hodge conjecture continued to resist his efforts. "Damn it all," he muttered, tossing down his chalk. He needed coffee. As he stood to stretch his cramping legs, he decided to take a quick walk to clear his mind. The hallways were silent except for the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Harrington wandered aimlessly, eventually finding himself near the faculty lounge. Coffee in hand, he began the trek back to classroom 3B. As he approached the room, something caught his attention. The lights were on. He distinctly remembered turning them off. Security must be doing their rounds, he thought, but as he drew closer, he heard something else, the soft scratch of chalk against board. Harrington paused at the doorway, coffee forgotten in his hand. There, standing before his chalkboard, was the janitor he'd passed earlier. But the man wasn't cleaning. He was writing, complex mathematical equations flowing from his hand with surprising speed and confidence. For a moment, Harrington stood frozen, watching as the janitor effortlessly worked through a series of advanced theorems related to the very problem that had been stumping him for weeks. The solution was elegant, innovative, and completely unexpected. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Harrington's voice cut through the silence like a whip. The janitor spun around, dropping the chalk. Pain flashed across his face as the sudden movement triggered his back, but it was quickly replaced by alarm. "Professor Harrington. I'm sorry, I was just tampering with my work." Harrington strode into the room, anger rising. "Do you have any idea how important this research is? Who put you up to this? Was it Wilson? Or Thompson?" The janitor shook his head, backing away from the board. "No one, sir. I was just what? Playing mathematician." Harrington scoffed, looking at the board more carefully now. "Where did you copy these equations from? A textbook? My notes?" "I didn't copy anything," the janitor said quietly, straightening slightly despite his discomfort. "That's my solution to your problem." Harrington laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Your solution? You expect me to believe that a janitor solved a problem that stumped the brightest minds at MIT? "My name is Marcus Johnson," the man said, a hint of dignity entering his voice. "And yes, that's exactly what I'm saying." Harrington's eyes narrowed as he examined the board more closely. The work was original, unlike anything he'd seen in the literature. It couldn't have been copied. But the alternative was impossible. He looked at Marcus with new suspicion. "Who are you really?" Harrington demanded. No janitor could understand this level of mathematics, let alone contribute to it. Marcus straightened fully now, despite the pain it caused him. "I taught myself, Professor. From books in the library, from auditing classes when I could, from the problems you and the other professors leave on these boards every night." Harrington circled the room, examining Marcus as if he were some curious specimen. "That's absurd. This level of mathematical understanding requires years of formal training, rigorous academic study." "Or just a mind that sees the patterns," Marcus replied softly. "Mathematics has always made sense to me, even when nothing else did." Harrington turned back to the board, following the elegant proof that continued where his own work had stalled. It was brilliant, if legitimate. And that was a very big if. "I don't believe you," he said finally. "This is some kind of trick. You're going to erase these boards immediately, and then we're going to have a conversation with campus security about your unauthorized activities." Marcus's expression fell, a familiar disappointment settling over his features. "As you wish, Professor," he said, reaching for the eraser. "But you're making a mistake. That proof works. It's the breakthrough you've been looking for." As Marcus began erasing his work, Harrington felt a flicker of doubt. What if this janitor was telling the truth? What if this unassuming man had actually solved what Harrington couldn't? The very notion challenged everything Harrington believed about intelligence, education, and who belonged in the rarefied air of theoretical mathematics. "Stop," Harrington said suddenly. "Leave it. I want to test something." Marcus paused, eraser in hand, a question in his eyes. "If you really derived this on your own," Harrington said, "prove it. Explain to me how you arrived at this approach." And so, in the quiet hours of the early morning, an unlikely conversation began between a prestigious MIT professor and a janitor with a secret genius, a conversation that would ultimately change both their lives forever. Marcus sat uncomfortably on the edge of a student desk, unable to fully relax as Professor Harrington interrogated him about his mathematical knowledge. The pain in his back was flaring again, a constant reminder of that day 15 years ago. "Tell me how you learned all this," Harrington demanded, gesturing toward the chalkboard. "Without formal training, it's simply not possible." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, memories washing over him. Atlanta, 2010. Marcus was 17, a senior at Westfield High School. Despite growing up in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods, he'd managed to maintain perfect grades, especially in mathematics. That day had started like any other, with Marcus arriving early to Dr. Victoria Winter's advanced placement calculus class. "Mr. Johnson, take your seat," Dr. Winters had said sharply as students filed in. "Ma'am, I was hoping I could stand today. My back is. This isn't a negotiation. Sit down or leave my classroom." Marcus had reluctantly lowered himself into a desk, pain shooting through his lower back from an injury he'd sustained helping his uncle with construction work over the weekend. When he'd raised his hand to correct an error in Dr. Winter's explanation of a limit theorem, her expression had hardened. "Mr. Johnson, are you suggesting you know better than I do?" "No, ma'am, but the theorem states." "Enough. I won't have you disrupting my class." When Marcus had tried to stand to ease his discomfort, Dr. Winters had grabbed his shoulder and pushed him back down forcefully. He'd lost his balance, falling awkwardly and wrenching his back. The pain had been excruciating, but what hurt more was the humiliation as classmates snickered. Later, when his mother had tried to address the incident with school administration, they'd dismissed it. Dr. Winters was a decorated educator, Marcus was just another black kid from the wrong side of town, likely exaggerating for attention. The injury had never properly healed. Worse, the incident had crushed his academic confidence at a critical time, right before college applications. His SAT scores were exceptional, but without teacher recommendations and with his now spotty attendance due to recurring back pain, his applications had been rejected. "I've been learning wherever I can," Marcus explained to Harrington, returning to the present. The library. Free online courses. Auditing classes when janitors are allowed to. Mostly, though, I learn from these. He gestured to the chalkboards surrounding them. You've been studying the work left on these boards? Harrington asked incredulously. Marcus nodded. 7 years of MIT mathematics, Professor. Different professors, different approaches. It's been like having dozens of private tutors who don't know they're teaching. Harrington circled the classroom, bewilderment evident in his expression. And your formal education? High school diploma. I was on track for a scholarship until. Marcus trailed off, unconsciously rubbing his lower back. Until what? Until it became clear that people like me weren't welcome in academic spaces, Marcus finished quietly. Harrington frowned. People like you. Black men from low-income backgrounds, Marcus stated plainly. Especially those who challenge authority or question established methods. An uncomfortable silence filled the room as Harrington processed this information, visibly conflicted between his mathematical interest and his entrenched biases. Show me more, he finally said, handing Marcus a piece of chalk. Prove this isn't some fluke. Despite the pain, despite the memories, despite everything, Marcus began to write. Solve this, Harrington demanded, scrawling a complex partial differential equation across the board. It was 3 a.m., and they'd been at this for hours. Marcus had passed every test the professor had thrown at him, but Harrington remained skeptical. Marcus studied the equation, chalk poised. His back screamed for relief, but he refused to show weakness. This was his one chance to be seen, truly seen, for his mind rather than his janitorial uniform. This is a variation on the Navier-Stokes equation, Marcus observed. You've added a constraint that makes it particularly challenging. Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly. Most doctoral candidates wouldn't recognize that. Without responding, Marcus began working through the solution methodically. His hand moved across the board with practiced precision, each step following logically from the last. When he finished 15 minutes later, he stepped back. There's an elegant solution using a modified Fourier transform, he explained, pointing to his work. Though I suspect there's another approach using. Yes, there is, Harrington interrupted, staring at the board in astonishment. I've only seen that solution in an unpublished paper from a colleague at Princeton. Marcus shrugged. I didn't see any papers. It just seemed the natural approach. Harrington paced the classroom, rubbing his temples. This defies everything I understand about mathematical education. You shouldn't be able to do this. Because I'm a janitor? Marcus asked quietly. Because mathematics at this level requires years of formal training. Harrington snapped. Years of structured learning, academic discourse, peer review. With respect, Professor, mathematics existed before universities did. People solved complex problems before formal education systems. The universe doesn't care about credentials. Harrington appeared ready to argue when the doors suddenly opened. Department head Dr. Eleanor Thompson stood in the doorway, her expression transitioning from surprise to confusion to stern disapproval. Richard? What's going on here? Her eyes darted from Harrington to Marcus to the chalkboards covered in equations. Eleanor, Harrington stammered. Is this janitor tampering with your research? Thompson demanded, her voice sharp. These equations are part of our department's proprietary work. I can explain, Marcus began, but Thompson cut him off with a dismissive gesture. Not interested. Professor Harrington, I expected better judgment from you. Allowing unauthorized personnel access to confidential research materials is a serious breach of protocol. Now wait just a minute, Harrington started, but Thompson had already pulled out her phone. I'm calling security, and then we'll discuss this with human resources in the morning. She turned cold eyes to Marcus. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately. Dr. Thompson, you don't understand, Marcus protested. I wasn't. Save it for HR, she snapped. Security will escort you from the premises. Marcus looked to Harrington, a silent plea in his eyes. The professor hesitated, clearly torn between defending Marcus and preserving his own academic standing. "Eleanor, perhaps we should discuss this privately," Harrington suggested weakly. But Dr. Thompson had already made her call. As Marcus gathered his things, the weight of injustice settled over him once again. Some things, it seemed, never changed. "Mr. Johnson, do you understand the seriousness of these allegations?" Marcus sat stiffly in the hard plastic chair across from Ms. Diane Morris, MIT's Assistant Director of Human Resources. The fluorescent lights in her windowless office buzzed overhead, adding to his discomfort. His back throbbed from the tension and from standing throughout the night. "Yes, ma'am, but they're not true. I wasn't stealing intellectual property." Ms. Morris glanced down at the report in front of her. "According to Dr. Thompson, you were found tampering with confidential research materials at 3 a.m., well outside your assigned duties." "I was solving an equation, not tampering with anything." Morris's eyebrows rose. "Solving an equation? Mr. Johnson, you're employed as a maintenance worker, not a mathematician." "I understand my job title," Marcus replied, struggling to keep frustration from his voice. "But the work on that board was my own. Ask Professor Harrington." "Professor Harrington has not made himself available for comment this morning," Morris said, her tone suggesting this was suspicious in itself. Dr. Thompson, however, was quite clear about what she witnessed. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Of course Harrington hadn't spoken up. What established professor would risk his reputation to defend a janitor? "Mr. Johnson, your employment record shows you've been with MIT for nearly 7 years with generally positive evaluations," Morris continued, her voice softening slightly. "However, this incident represents a serious breach of trust. Unauthorized access to research materials could potentially compromise millions in grants and years of faculty work." "I didn't access any materials that weren't publicly visible on chalkboards," Marcus insisted. "I was cleaning the classroom when Professor Harrington came in. We began discussing the mathematics. That's all." Morris looked skeptical. "You expect me to believe that Professor Harrington, one of our most distinguished faculty members, was having a casual mathematical discussion with a janitor at 3 a.m.? The word stung, but Marcus had heard worse. "Whether you believe it or not, it's what happened." "I see." Morris closed the folder. "Well, unfortunately, Dr. Thompson has requested your immediate termination, and as department head, her assessment carries significant weight." Marcus felt a hollowness spreading in his chest. This job had been more than just a paycheck, it had been his classroom, his university, his connection to the world of mathematics he loved but had been denied entry to. "Is there any appeal process?" he asked quietly. "You're welcome to submit a written statement, but without faculty support, I must be honest about your chances." Morris hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I can provide a neutral reference for future employment." Marcus nodded numbly. "May I collect my personal items from my locker?" "Security will accompany you." 30 minutes later, Marcus stood outside MIT's imposing entrance, a small box containing 7 years of his life in his hands. His security badge had been deactivated. The library access that had allowed him to study advanced texts during breaks, gone. The classrooms where he'd absorbed lectures from the shadows, now forbidden territory. As he waited for the bus that would take him back to his small apartment in Dorchester, Marcus saw Professor Harrington exiting the building, engrossed in conversation with colleagues. Their eyes met briefly across the plaza. For a moment, Marcus thought Harrington might acknowledge him, might come over and explain, might even apologize. Instead, the professor quickly looked away, continuing his conversation as if he'd seen nothing at all. Marcus boarded the bus, the familiar pain in his back now matched by a deeper ache in his chest. He'd lost more than a job today. He'd lost his education, his purpose, his chance to be recognized for his mind rather than his mop. As the bus pulled away from MIT, Marcus didn't look back. He couldn't bear to see the place that had simultaneously nurtured and rejected him fade into the distance. Instead, he stared down at his hands, hands that could clean toilets or solve complex differential equations with equal skill, but in a world that only valued one of those abilities. Tomorrow he would begin searching for another job. The rent wouldn't wait for justice. 3 days after his dismissal, Marcus sat on a bench in Boston Common, absently watching pigeons fight over bread crumbs. His notebook lay open on his lap, filled with equations, his way of staying sane while his job applications went unanswered. Those are some interesting approaches to Riemann's hypothesis. Marcus looked up, startled. Professor James Wilson stood before him, distinguished in a tweed jacket despite the warm spring day. Unlike most MIT faculty, Wilson had always greeted the maintenance staff by name. Still, Marcus was surprised the professor recognized him out of context. "Professor Wilson," Marcus acknowledged, closing his notebook self-consciously. "May I?" Wilson gestured to the empty space on the bench. Marcus nodded, shifting slightly to ease his back. "I heard about what happened," Wilson said without preamble. "Thompson's version is making the rounds, but Harrington's been unusually quiet." "I'm not surprised," Marcus replied. Standing up for a janitor wouldn't exactly enhance his reputation. Wilson studied him thoughtfully. "Those equations on the board that night, they were yours, weren't they?" Marcus hesitated before nodding. "I thought so. I reviewed the security footage, standard procedure for terminations. Your work was remarkable." "Doesn't matter now," Marcus said, looking away. "They've made it clear where I belong, and it's not in a classroom." "That's where you're wrong," Wilson said firmly. "I've been teaching mathematics for 30 years, and I know brilliance when I see it. Your approach to the modified Hodge conjecture was genuinely innovative." Marcus looked at him in surprise. "You could tell that from security footage?" Wilson smiled slightly. "I may have accessed the classroom afterward and photographed the boards before they were erased. Academic curiosity." For the first time in days, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "Professor Wilson, why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been where you are, not exactly, but close enough." Wilson's expression grew serious. "When I started at MIT in the 90s, I was the only black professor in the mathematics department. Some colleagues wouldn't even acknowledge my presence in faculty meetings. One senior professor suggested I was only hired to fulfill a quota." "What changed?" Marcus asked. "I published a paper that couldn't be ignored. Excellence has a way of silencing prejudice, temporarily, at least." Wilson leaned forward. "Marcus, Harrington's been working on that problem for months. You solved it in what, a few hours?" "I'd been thinking about it for weeks," Marcus admitted. "Whenever I cleaned his classroom, I'd study his approach." Wilson nodded, unsurprised. "I have a proposal for you. The Institute of Advanced Mathematical Sciences is hosting a competition next month, anonymous submissions, blind judging. First prize includes publication and a substantial grant." "I can't enter. I don't have the credentials." "The submission is anonymous," Wilson repeated. "No names, no backgrounds, just pure mathematics. I'm on the selection committee, I can ensure your work is considered fairly." Marcus stared at his notebook, conflicted. "Even if I won, what would it change? I still wouldn't have a degree, still wouldn't be accepted." "One battle at a time, son," Wilson said gently. "Let's prove your mathematical ability first. The rest will follow." Marcus remembered Dr. Winters, remembered Thompson's dismissive glare, remembered Harrington's silence. He also remembered the joy of mathematics, the pure satisfaction of solving problems that had defeated others. "What about Harrington?" he asked finally. "Won't he recognize my work?" Wilson smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "That's counting on him to remember your approach in detail. In my experience, brilliant people often only fully recognize work they've created themselves." Marcus found himself returning the smile. "So I just send him my solution?" "With some refinements," Wilson said, tapping Marcus's notebook. "We'll need to formalize your proof, ensure the notation is standardized. I can help with that, if you'll accept my assistance. For the first time since his dismissal, Marcus felt something like purpose returning. When do we start? Right now, Wilson said, pulling a pen from his jacket pocket. Show me everything you've been working on. As they bent over the notebook together, Marcus felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He wasn't alone anymore. Someone finally saw him, not the janitor, but the mathematician he'd always been. In Wilson's apartment that evening, surrounded by books and the smell of strong coffee, Marcus worked feverishly to formalize his proof while Wilson offered occasional guidance. For once, his mind was so engaged that he barely noticed his back pain. You know, Wilson said during a break, Harrington's not a bad man, just a product of his environment. I've known him for 15 years. He values mathematical truth above all else. Not enough to speak up for me, Marcus pointed out. Wilson sighed. People are complicated, Marcus. Sometimes they need a push to do the right thing. And this competition is that push. Wilson smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I believe in creating opportunities for truth to emerge. The rest is up to individuals to choose their path. As midnight approached, they finalized the submission. Wilson would handle the formal entry process to maintain anonymity. What happens after the competition? Marcus asked. One step at a time, Wilson replied. But know this, talent like yours finds a way. Always has, always will. For the first time in days, Marcus slept without dreams of empty classrooms and erased chalkboards. The main lecture hall at MIT buzzed with anticipation. The Institute of Advanced Mathematical Sciences had announced a special presentation of the winning submission from their international competition. Unusually, the entire mathematics faculty had been encouraged to attend. Professor Harrington sat in the front row, expression neutral despite his inner turmoil. The past month had been difficult. His work on the modified Hodge conjecture had stalled completely, and memories of the janitor's elegant solution haunted him. He'd avoided speaking about the incident, deflecting Thompson's questions and burying himself in work. He'd considered contacting Marcus, even drove by the man's apartment once, but pride and uncertainty held him back. What would he even say? Sorry I didn't defend you, but was that really your original work? The thought made him cringe. Dr. Wilson approached the podium, looking unusually formal in a tailored suit. Distinguished colleagues, thank you for joining us today. As you know, the IAMS competition attracted submissions from mathematicians worldwide. The winning entry represents a breakthrough approach to the modified Hodge conjecture, one that has profound implications for algebraic geometry. Harrington sat up straighter. That was his research area. Before I present the winning solution, Wilson continued, I've been asked to explain the blind evaluation process. All identifying information was removed from submissions. Judges assessed the mathematics solely on its merit, no names, no universities, no credentials. Wilson activated the projector, and familiar equations appeared on the screen behind him. Harrington's heart began to race. He recognized those elegant lines, that innovative approach. It was the solution from his classroom, Marcus's solution. The approach utilizes a novel application of sheaf cohomology, Wilson explained, walking the audience through the proof step by step. The elegance lies in this unexpected connection between topological and algebraic structures. Harrington barely heard the technical explanation. His mind was reeling. If this was truly Marcus's work, submitted to a prestigious competition and judged the winner by experts in the field. After the formal presentation, Wilson opened the floor for questions. Harrington raised his hand immediately. This approach seems familiar, he said carefully. Has the author published similar work previously? Wilson's eyes met his, carrying an unspoken challenge. The author has not published before, which makes this contribution all the more remarkable. Another professor spoke up. This work shows extraordinary insight. I'm curious which university the mathematician comes from. That brings me to my next announcement, Wilson replied. In keeping with the spirit of blind evaluation, I've invited the author to present their work in person next week. I believe many of you will find their background illuminating. As the presentation concluded, Harrington approached Wilson privately. "It's him, isn't it?" he asked without preamble. "The janitor." Wilson neither confirmed nor denied. "You recognize the work?" "Of course I did. I saw him create it." Harrington ran a hand through his hair. "I've never seen anything like it. But how could someone without formal training, how indeed?" Wilson interrupted. "Perhaps our assumptions about who can do mathematics need revision." "I should have spoken up," Harrington admitted. "When Thompson fired him. I couldn't process what I'd seen." "You'll have a chance to make things right," Wilson said. "Marcus will be presenting his work next Friday. The entire department will be there, including Dr. Thompson." Harrington winced. "She won't take this well." "No, she won't," Wilson agreed. "The question is, where will you stand when the moment comes?" As Wilson walked away, Harrington remained rooted in place, confronting uncomfortable truths about himself. He'd built his career on the pursuit of mathematical truth, yet when faced with evidence that challenged his worldview, he'd looked away. The irony wasn't lost on him. For weeks, he'd struggled with the modified Hodge conjecture, searching for a breakthrough. When it came from an unexpected source, he'd failed to recognize its value, or worse, recognized it but failed to acknowledge it. Harrington returned to his office and closed the door. On his desk sat the draft of his paper for the Wolf Prize, incomplete, stalled at precisely the point where Marcus's insight would have broken through. With sudden clarity, Harrington realized what he needed to do. Friday arrived with an atmosphere of unusual tension in MIT's largest lecture hall. Word had spread that the winner of the prestigious IAMS competition would be revealed, and the room was packed with faculty, graduate students, and even some undergraduate mathematics majors eager to witness mathematical history. At the back of the hall, Marcus stood alone, fighting the urge to flee. He wore a borrowed suit from Professor Wilson that didn't quite fit his taller frame. The formal clothes felt like a costume, a desperate attempt to belong in a world that had already rejected him. "You ready?" Wilson appeared beside him, offering quiet support. Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. "Remember, you earned this moment," Wilson said firmly. "Your mathematics speaks for itself." At the podium, Dean Michaels was making introductions, his voice echoing through the hall's perfect acoustics. "And now, Professor Wilson will introduce our distinguished competition winner." As Wilson made his way to the front, Marcus scanned the audience. In the front row sat Professor Harrington, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Beside him, Dr. Thompson leafed through the printed proof with a skeptical expression. "Colleagues, students, distinguished guests," Wilson began. "Mathematics has always transcended boundaries, cultural, geographical, and social. Today, we witness a powerful reminder of that truth." Wilson gestured toward the back of the room. "I'm honored to introduce the author of this breakthrough work on the modified Hodge conjecture, Mr. Marcus Johnson." A murmur rippled through the audience as all heads turned. Marcus forced himself forward, each step painful as his back protested the stress and tension. The walk to the podium felt endless. As Marcus took his position at the front, recognition dawned on many faces. The janitor. The man who cleaned their offices, emptied their trash, polished their floors. "Many of you know Mr. Johnson," Wilson continued, undeterred by the whispers. "He's worked at MIT for 7 years, not as a professor or student, but as a member of our maintenance staff." Dr. Thompson stood abruptly. "This is absurd. A janitor couldn't possibly have produced this work." "Yet he did," Wilson replied calmly. "The proof was evaluated blindly by 7 mathematicians, including 2 Fields medalists. It was unanimously selected as the winner." "There must be some mistake," Thompson insisted. "Or misconduct. Perhaps he copied the work from somewhere, or someone." Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward Harrington. The implication hung in the air: Marcus must have stolen the work from a real mathematician. Marcus gripped the podium, pain shooting through his back and something worse through his heart. Same story, different day. No matter what he achieved, people like Thompson would never see past his skin color and job title. Then, unexpectedly, Professor Harrington stood. "There's been no mistake," he said clearly. "And no misconduct." All eyes turned to him. Thompson looked betrayed. "Richard, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I witnessed Mr. Johnson develop this proof," Harrington continued, his voice gaining strength. "In fact, I watched him solve in hours what I couldn't resolve in months." A shocked silence fell over the hall. "You knew about this?" Thompson demanded. "Why didn't you say anything when I terminated his employment?" Harrington had the grace to look ashamed. "Because I failed to do the right thing. I let my preconceptions cloud my judgment, preconceptions about who can do mathematics, about what credentials mean, about where brilliance can be found." He turned to face Marcus directly. "I was wrong, and I apologize." Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging the apology without fully accepting it yet. "This is still highly irregular," Thompson insisted, but her protest sounded hollow now. "Irregular, yes," Harrington agreed. "But mathematics doesn't care about regularity, Eleanor. It doesn't care about degrees or titles or institutional affiliations. It only cares about truth. And the truth is, Mr. Johnson has made a significant contribution to our field." Wilson stepped forward again. "Which is why I've recommended that MIT offer Mr. Johnson a special research position, with the opportunity to formally study while continuing his groundbreaking work." Thompson's face flushed. "That's not your decision to make, James." "No," came a new voice from the side entrance. "It's mine." President Reeves, MIT's first female president, walked purposefully to the front of the hall. "And I've approved the position. MIT was founded on merit and innovation, not pedigree. We would be hypocrites to ignore extraordinary talent because it came from an unexpected source." Marcus stood stunned as the trajectory of his life shifted before his eyes. He looked from Wilson to Harrington to President Reeves, barely processing what was happening. "If I may," he finally said, finding his voice. "I'd like to present my work now." And so, standing rather than sitting due to his back pain, a constant reminder of past injustices, Marcus Johnson began to explain his mathematical breakthrough to a room full of some of the world's leading mathematicians. Some listened with open minds, others with skepticism, but all with growing respect as the elegant proof unfolded. For the first time in his life, Marcus was seen for his mind, not his circumstance. The journey ahead would not be easy. Prejudice doesn't disappear in a day, but in this moment, mathematics had spoken louder than bias. And everyone in that room heard it clearly. Professor Richard Harrington sat in his study at home, surrounded by familiar comforts, leather-bound books, awards, family photos, yet feeling like a stranger to himself. In the 3 weeks since Marcus Johnson's presentation, Harrington had been re-examining his life with uncomfortable honesty. "You've been distracted," his wife Caroline observed, setting a cup of tea beside him. "Ever since that competition." Harrington sighed. "I've been thinking about Marcus Johnson." "The janitor mathematician?" Caroline sat across from him. "You mentioned him before. Brilliant man who solved your problem." "Not just brilliant," Harrington corrected. "Extraordinary. Self-taught, working nights, studying where and when he could." "And what did I do when I discovered him?" "I questioned, doubted, then stood by silently when he was fired." Caroline studied her husband's troubled face. In 30 years of marriage, she'd rarely seen him so affected by a professional situation. "Richard, what's really bothering you?" He met her eyes. "I've always believed mathematics was pure, objective truth unconcerned with who discovers it. Yet I couldn't accept that truth when it came from a janitor with dark skin." "People make mistakes," Caroline said gently. "This wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation." Harrington stood, pacing restlessly. "How many others have I overlooked? How many brilliant minds have I dismissed because they didn't fit my narrow definition of a mathematician?" The next morning, Harrington requested a meeting with Dr. Victoria Winters, visiting MIT for a mathematics education conference. Her reputation had preceded her, strict, traditional, decorated with teaching awards despite numerous complaints from minority students. Professor Harrington, she greeted him warmly in the campus coffee shop. I've followed your work for years. Your paper on algebraic geometry was brilliant. Dr. Winters, he acknowledged. Thank you for meeting me. I wanted to discuss a former student of yours, Marcus Johnson. Her smile faltered slightly. Johnson? The name doesn't immediately ring a bell. I've taught thousands of students. He remembers you quite clearly, Harrington said. Particularly an incident where you physically forced him to sit down despite his back injury, causing him lasting damage. Winters' expression hardened. I maintain classroom discipline, Professor. Students can't simply do as they please. Even when they're in pain. Even when they're trying to learn despite that pain. If I made accommodations for every student with a complaint, he was your best student, Harrington interrupted. Mathematically gifted. He tried to correct an error in your lecture. Impossible. I don't make mathematical errors. Harrington pushed a folder across the table. Inside was Marcus's winning proof, along with notes from his high school years that Wilson had helped recover, evidence of extraordinary talent. Marcus Johnson is now a research fellow at MIT, Harrington explained. The work in that folder revolutionized my field. But he nearly didn't get the chance to create it, because educators like you and academics like me put credentials above capability, conformity above creativity. Winters glanced at the papers, then back at Harrington with narrowed eyes. What exactly do you want from me? Reflection. Acknowledgement. Perhaps an apology. For maintaining standards. For upholding discipline. She laughed shortly. Professor, we clearly have different educational philosophies. No, Harrington said quietly. We have different human philosophies. As Winters gathered her things to leave, visibly offended, Harrington realized something important. Some people wouldn't change, no matter what evidence they faced. His responsibility wasn't to convince everyone, it was to ensure the Marcus Johnsons of the world weren't blocked by the Dr. Winters and Eleanor Thompsons any longer. That afternoon, Harrington drafted a proposal for a new initiative at MIT, a talent identification program that would look beyond traditional academic paths to find exceptional mathematical minds in underrepresented communities. When he shared the draft with Wilson later that week, the older professor smiled. You're serious about this, Wilson observed. Completely, Harrington confirmed. I've already spoken with 3 potential donors. The Marcus Johnson Initiative will provide resources, mentorship, and pathways to academic recognition for gifted mathematicians from non-traditional backgrounds. And Marcus? Have you spoken with him about using his name? Harrington looked away. Not yet. Our interactions have been, professional but distant. I'm not sure he's forgiven me. Forgiveness takes time, Wilson said. But action speaks louder than words. This, he tapped the proposal, this is action. That evening, Harrington finally gathered the courage to visit Marcus's new office, formerly a storage room, hastily converted after his appointment. Marcus stood at a whiteboard, writing equations, still standing rather than sitting due to his back. Professor Harrington, Marcus acknowledged, without turning. Marcus. I hope I'm not interrupting. Just working through some implications of the proof. Did you need something? Harrington hesitated, then placed the initiative proposal on the desk. I'd like your input on this. And your permission to use your name. Marcus scanned the document, his expression unreadable. Why? He asked finally. Because what happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone else, Harrington answered. And because I need to do better. We all do. For the first time, Marcus looked at him directly. This won't fix systemic problems overnight. No, Harrington agreed. But it's a start. And if it helps even one person avoid the obstacles you faced, wouldn't that be worthwhile? Marcus considered this, then picked up a pen and began making notes on the proposal. The selection criteria need work. And you'll need people with diverse backgrounds on the committee. As they began discussing details, something shifted between them, not friendship, exactly, but a cautious mutual respect founded on their shared love of mathematics and growing commitment to making its beauty accessible to all. The transformation had begun, not just for Harrington, but for the institution itself. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Eleanor Thompson's voice carried across the conference table in the president's office. "Admitting someone without even a bachelor's degree to a doctoral program violates every academic standard we have." President Reeves remained calm, unruffled by Thompson's objection. MIT was founded to advance knowledge and educate students in science and technology. Nowhere in that mission does it specify traditional paths must be followed. The meeting had been called to discuss Marcus Johnson's formal academic future. After 3 months as a special research fellow, his extraordinary abilities could no longer be ignored, but his lack of conventional credentials remained a stumbling block for some faculty members. "We're talking about creating a special admissions category," Thompson persisted. "What's to prevent others from demanding the same treatment?" "The same thing that prevents everyone from winning Fields medals," Professor Wilson replied dryly. "Exceptional mathematical ability is, by definition, exceptional." Harrington, who had remained quiet until now, leaned forward. "Perhaps this conversation should include the person we're discussing." President Reeves nodded. "Agreed. Please ask Mr. Johnson to join us." When Marcus entered, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Gone was the hesitant janitor from months ago. In his place stood a man who carried himself with quiet confidence, despite the slight stiffness in his movements from his persistent back pain. "Mr. Johnson," President Reeves began, "we're discussing your academic path forward. Dr. Thompson has expressed concerns about creating special exceptions to our admission standards." Marcus nodded. "I understand those concerns. Academic standards exist for good reasons." "Then you see why this situation is problematic," Thompson interjected. "What I see," Marcus replied evenly, "is an institution wrestling with a question of substance versus form. Is the purpose of education credentialing or learning? Does mathematical ability require sequential stamps of approval, or can it flourish outside traditional structures?" The room fell silent as his words sank in. "Well said," Harrington murmured. "I'm not asking for a free pass," Marcus continued. "Test me. Challenge me. Verify my knowledge in whatever way you deem appropriate. But don't deny opportunity based on the path I couldn't take rather than the knowledge I've gained." President Reeves smiled. "That's precisely what we intend to do. Professor Wilson and Professor Harrington have developed a comprehensive assessment protocol, essentially allowing you to demonstrate mastery of undergraduate and master's level mathematics through examination rather than coursework." "And if I pass?" Marcus asked. "Then you'll be formally admitted to our doctoral program, with your published proof serving as the foundation of your dissertation." Thompson wasn't ready to concede. "This still sends a problematic message about our standards." "I disagree," Harrington said firmly. "It sends a powerful message about our values. Are we more concerned with how knowledge is acquired or that it exists? Are we gatekeepers or educators?" President Reeves stood, signaling the discussion was concluding. "Mr. Johnson, are you willing to undergo this assessment process?" "Absolutely," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Excellent. Professors Wilson and Harrington will coordinate the examinations." She turned to Thompson. "Eleanor, I'd like you to participate as well. Your rigor will ensure the process is unimpeachable." Thompson looked startled but nodded stiffly. "Very well." As the meeting adjourned, Harrington pulled Marcus aside. "There's something else you should know. The Marcus Johnson Initiative received full funding yesterday. Starting next fall, we'll identify 5 exceptional talents from underrepresented backgrounds annually." Marcus looked stunned. "That was fast. Your story resonated with people. Particularly with a former MIT graduate who came from similar circumstances but had more luck with supportive teachers. Who will run it?" That's what I wanted to discuss, Harrington said. We need someone who understands both the mathematical requirements and the unique challenges these students will face. Someone who can recognize unconventional brilliance. The implication was clear. Once Marcus completed his doctoral work, there would be a place for him at MIT beyond research, a chance to ensure others like him wouldn't face the same barriers. Later that week, a press conference announced both the initiative and Marcus's unique path to doctoral studies. Cameras flashed as Marcus stood with Wilson, Harrington, and President Reeves on the steps of the mathematics building. One reporter called out, "Mr. Johnson, how does it feel to go from janitor to doctoral candidate?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "The only difference is that now people see what was always there," he replied. "I'm the same person who cleaned these hallways, just one who's finally been given the opportunity to contribute in another way." As news of Marcus's story spread, hundreds of emails flooded in, from custodial workers with secret passions for literature, security guards pursuing law degrees at night, retail employees teaching themselves coding. People who saw in Marcus's journey a validation of their own hidden talents and aspirations. At a small celebration in Wilson's apartment that evening, Marcus read some of these messages aloud to Wilson and Harrington. "This is the real impact," he said quietly. "Not just my opportunity, but what it represents to others." Wilson raised his glass. "To visible genius, wherever it may be found." As they toasted, Marcus knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, something fundamental had changed, not just for him, but for every person who'd ever been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. The door had been opened. Now others could follow. 1 year later, Marcus Johnson stood at the front of MIT's Lecture Hall 3B, the same room where, not so long ago, he had cleaned floors and secretly solved equations in the midnight hours. Now, students filled the seats, notebooks open, eyes attentive. His first official lecture as a teaching assistant while completing his accelerated doctoral program. "Mathematics," he began, "is the universal language that transcends barriers of culture, background, and circumstance. It cares not who you are, only how you think." He remained standing throughout the lecture, his back still troubling him, a permanent reminder of past obstacles. Yet what had once been a source of shame was now worn almost as a badge of honor. His students knew his story, many had enrolled specifically to learn from the janitor mathematician, who had challenged the academic establishment. The door opened quietly, and Professor Harrington slipped in, taking a seat at the back. Their relationship had evolved into a complex mentorship, not without tension, but built on growing mutual respect. Weekly, they worked together on the Marcus Johnson Initiative, which had already identified 3 remarkable mathematical talents working in unexpected places: a delivery driver in Chicago, a home health aide in Atlanta, a warehouse worker in Oakland. As Marcus guided his students through an elegant proof, he occasionally caught glimpses of his former self in their faces, particularly in a young woman who cleaned university offices early mornings before attending class on scholarship. When she asked a particularly insightful question, he made sure to acknowledge its brilliance in front of everyone. After class, as students filed out, Harrington approached the front. "Impressive first lecture," he said. "You have a natural teaching ability." "Thanks," Marcus replied, gathering his notes. "I had years to observe the best, and worst, teaching techniques from the back of rooms like this." Harrington nodded, acknowledging the gentle rebuke in Marcus's words. "The selection committee is meeting tomorrow for the initiative. We have over 200 applications." "I'll be there," Marcus assured him. "After my examination with Dr. Thompson." Thompson had remained skeptical but professional throughout Marcus's assessment process. Her rigorous testing had actually strengthened the legitimacy of his advancement. No one could claim he'd received special treatment in terms of mathematical standards. As they walked through the corridor together, students and faculty nodded respectfully to Marcus. His story had transformed the atmosphere at MIT in subtle but important ways. Maintenance staff were greeted by name. Study groups sometimes included security guards or administrative assistants pursuing degrees. Small changes that signaled a larger shift in perception. "There's something else," Harrington said as they reached Marcus's office, a real office now, with windows and bookshelves. Dr. Winters reached out. Marcus stiffened slightly. What did she want? To apologize, believe it or not. Apparently, your story has been featured in an education journal highlighting systemic barriers to academic advancement. She's facing some scrutiny at her institution. Marcus absorbed this information silently. The apology came too late to undo the damage to his back, too late to restore the years of opportunity he'd lost. Yet there was satisfaction in knowing his journey might prevent similar injustices. Tell her I accept her apology, he said finally. And recommend she read the latest draft of our initiative guidelines. She might learn something. That evening, Marcus stood at the chalkboard in his office, working through equations related to his expanding dissertation. His mind moved through mathematical landscapes with the same freedom it always had, but now his insights were shared, published, discussed, allowed to contribute to humanity's collective understanding. A knock at the door interrupted his work. A cleaning crew member, a young Dominican man named Raphael who had recently begun asking Marcus about calculus, stood hesitantly in the doorway. Sorry to bother you, Dr. Johnson, he said. I was hoping, if you had time. Come in, Raphael, Marcus said warmly, putting down his chalk. And it's not doctor yet, but I'm working on it. What problem are you stuck on today? As they bent over Raphael's community college textbook together, Marcus felt the circle completing. His journey wasn't just about personal vindication or individual success. It was about creating a new pattern, a new algorithm for recognizing brilliance in unexpected places. Outside his window, the MIT campus stretched away into the gathering dusk, its buildings glowing with light and possibility. Within those buildings, equations were being solved, discoveries made, futures shaped. And now, some of those futures would follow paths never before imagined, paths illuminated by a janitor who refused to be defined by others' perceptions. Mathematics had always been Marcus's true language. Now, finally, the world was listening. Dear friend, talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. Stories like Marcus Johnson's remind us that brilliance can be found in unexpected places, if only we have the courage to look beyond labels and prejudice. Every person deserves to be judged by their abilities, not their circumstances or appearance. If this story moved you, please help us spread this important message by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these powerful narratives that challenge our perceptions and inspire positive change. Together, we can create a world where no genius goes unrecognized, no matter where they come from.